Shalom, welcome to the Parsha Themes Shir. It's Parsha Beshalach, and also a little bit on the festival of Tu B'Shvat, which is today. And it's for the Refuah Shalema of Moshe Shimon ben Leah, Esther Chaya. So we start off at the very beginning of the Parsha. The Torah keyword, vayuhi. The pasuk, the verse states, vayuhi beshalach paro es ha'am v'lo nacham Elokim. When Pharaoh sent out the people, God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines. The Gemara in Megillah brings a tradition that the word vayuhi, which is the first word of the Parsha, is an expression that connotes pain and distress. When this word appears in Tanakh, the Jewish scriptures, it implies that something is amiss, that there is something happening that causes unhappiness. If so, its appearance at the beginning of Parsha Beshalach seems out of place in the context of Bnei Yisrael's departure from Egypt, which was one of the most joyous events in human history. The Or HaChaim finds the answer in the next words, Beshalach paro es ha'am, when Pharaoh sent out the people. This phrase describes Pharaoh sending Bnei Yisrael out of Egypt, as though God had nothing to do with it. We know that Pharaoh repeatedly refused to let Bnei Yisrael leave, and it was only the 10th and final plague, the plague of the firstborn, that finally forced Pharaoh's hand and compelled him to let them leave. The phrase Pharaoh sent out the people is a terrible distortion of the truth, suggesting that Pharaoh made the decision on his own to send Bnei Yisrael out of the country. Unfortunately, though, this is how the event of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the exodus from Egypt, was perceived by many. Although it was clearly Hashem, through the miraculous plagues, who brought Bnei Yisrael out of Egypt, there were those who denied his involvement and insisted that Pharaoh chose to allow Bnei Yisrael to leave. And this, the Or HaChaim explains, is the element of pain that was felt at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Amid the jubilation of Bnei Yisrael's long-awaited freedom, there was distress over the grave misperception of the events, over the fact that God's unmistakable role was not acknowledged by all. Rav Elimelech of Lizhensk offers a different explanation for the implication of pain in this opening pasuk. He cites the Midrash's comment interpreting the verse to mean that Pharaoh escorted Bnei Yisrael out of Egypt. He did not just tell them to leave, he actually accompanied them as they made their way out. The pain implied by the word vayuhi thus refers to the fact that although the Jews left Egypt, Egypt did not leave the Jews. They left the country, but to some degree the values, beliefs, and customs of ancient Egypt accompanied them. Having spent over 2 centuries in Egypt, Egyptian culture was still part of them, and it would take some time for them to rid themselves of this influence. True freedom meant not simply the release from bondage, but also the release from foreign influences, the freedom to think and to act the way we as Jews are meant to, and this still had yet to happen at the time when Bnei Yisrael left Egypt. Now we are where we're meant to be. The pasuk states, "V'Hashem holech lifnehem yom ba'amud anon lanchoisam haderech v'layla ba'amud eish." Hashem went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them on the way, and by night in a pillar of fire. So Hashem travelled, as it were, ahead of them in the form of a pillar of cloud to show them the way, says the pasuk. The cloud served as their GPS, their navigation tool, so that they knew where to go. Rav Shmuel Berenbaum raises the question of why this was necessary. Certainly, he notes, there must have been among the 2 to 3 million members of the nation at least several people who knew the way. He answers that the pillar of cloud was necessary not to show Bnei Yisrael the route, but rather to show them and us that Hashem is always leading the way. He is always bringing us to where we need to go. Similarly, elsewhere, the Torah states, Al pi Hashem yachanu v'al pi Hashem yisa'u. By the word of Hashem they encamped, and by the word of Hashem they travelled. Just as the Torah says that Bnei Yisrael travelled and encamped solely by the word of God, so the same is true of each of us at every moment of our lives. Hashem always directs us along the path we need to take. Although we do not see a pillar of cloud guiding us and directing us, it is Hashem who orchestrates events and who puts ideas in our minds such that we end up where we are supposed to be. We read that Hashem commanded Bnei Israel to make what appeared to be a wrong turn toward the sea, which led Pharaoh to conclude that Bnei Israel were lost. He goes on to explain that Bnei Israel were lost only in Pharaoh's mind, but not in reality. For if a person ever feels lost, this reflects a deficiency in his emunah, his faith. If a person truly believes that Hashem is charting his course, that nothing happens randomly, that he is always precisely where Hashem wants him to be, then even if he took a wrong turn, so to speak, even when unexpected and unwanted circumstances arise, and even when he is unsure of where to go or what to do, he is not lost. He is in the right place, precisely where Hashem wants him to be, so he could grow and fulfill his mission. It is only if one lives without this awareness that he can feel lost and directionless, that he's wandering about aimlessly without getting anywhere. Living with emunah means to embrace your place, to accept our given situation as the place where we are meant to be, and to try to find the opportunities for achievement and for growth in the very circumstances in which we find ourselves currently. Now, our money and us, making a living versus really living. So the pasuk states, "V'yahafeich levav paro v'avodov v'yomru ma zos asinu ki shelachnu es bnei Yisrael." And Pharaoh and his servants had a change of heart, and they said, "What is this we've done by sending out Bnei Israel from serving us?" Several days after Bnei Israel left Egypt, Pharaoh and his servants experienced a sudden, drastic change of heart. Soon after they frantically drove Bnei Israel out, dreading the plague of the death of the firstborn that God had brought upon the country, they now regretted the decision to release the slaves. Pharaoh mobilized an army and pursued Bnei Israel, trapping them against the sea, where the Egyptian army would eventually drown. Rashi explains the Egyptians changed their mind and decided to pursue Bnei Israel to retrieve their belongings. At the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim, before Bnei Israel left, they turned to their Egyptian neighbors and asked for clothing, utensils, jewelry, and more. The Egyptians happily gave them whatever they had, and thus Bnei Israel left Egypt with vast amounts of riches. Pharaoh and his subjects now decided to pursue Bnei Israel to retrieve all these goods. This on its own demonstrates the genius of Hashem's plan to ultimately destroy the pursuing army. Rashi's comments show us how far people go for the sake of money. Pharaoh and his men had chased Bnei Israel out of the country in panic, fearing for their lives, but now they decided to bring the people back, despite the danger, so they could retrieve their money. This is reminiscent of Lot, who was living in the wicked city of Sodom when God decided to annihilate the city. 2 angels were sent to rescue him, but when they urged him to flee, he hesitated. The commentators explain that Lot was reluctant to leave behind all his assets. His life was in immediate danger, but he nevertheless delayed out of concern for his wealth, because some people regard their money as no less important than their very lives. The Gemara in Berachos explains the Shema, where it states to love Hashem b'chol levavecha, u'b'chol nafshecha, u'b'chol miyodecha, with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your wealth. Even after commanding us to love Hashem with all our souls, we must be commanded also to love Him with all our money, because, in the Gemara's words, some people cherish their money more than their lives. This happens when people confuse their net worth with their essential worth, when money becomes the ends and not the means. Tragically, there are those who constantly make a living instead of just living. They live their lives for the sake of earning money instead of earning money for the sake of living their lives. When this happens, people can end up like the Egyptians and like Lot, when they are where they are prepared to endanger their lives for money, because they have come to view money as the sole purpose of their lives. We must always remember that money is merely the means to living a fulfilling and meaningful life. We should never define ourselves based on our portfolio, our salary, or our net worth. Our assets are there to allow us to define ourselves through our mitzvahs, our relationships, our contributions, and the impact we have on the people around us and on the world. Now, utilizing moments of adversity. The Midrash offers another interpretation of Pharaoh's chasing of the Jews. By chasing them, Pharaoh drew the Jews nearer to God, as evidenced by their crying out to him when they saw the Egyptian army approaching. Indeed, it is often opposition that awakens our deepest reserves of energy, which we can then direct to spiritual growth. When we are confronted with a challenge, we should view it as an opportunity for such spiritual growth, rather than try to avoid it. Comfort and contentment can cause us to lose sight of priorities, weakening our sense of urgency in our divine mission. In contrast, physical or spiritual adversity can shock us out of this indifference, undermining our self-assurance, but in so doing affording us the opportunity to advance in our relationship with God by breaking through the obstacle. Another lesson we can learn from the fleeing nation is that when a person is only escaping pain and not yet moving toward a vision, the past still holds power over him. What we are running away from has a way of chasing us and catching up with us. We see this in relationships, in habits, in patterns we've learned to tolerate even when they hurt. This also applies to making Aliyah to Israel. Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, should not be where we go because we're afraid and escaping pain and suffering, but rather because it's the place we're meant to be. Now, Yosef's bones accompanied the Jews. The Pasuk states, "Vayikach Moshe es atzmos Yosef imo," and Moshe took the bones of Yosef with him. Yosef had left instructions for the Jews to take his remains out of Egypt when they would eventually leave. Moshe therefore went to great lengths to take Yosef's remains along when the Jews left Egypt. His remains were eventually interred in Shechem in Israel. Similarly, the Jews carried the bones of all of Yaakov's sons out of Egypt. The basic message was, when we're setting out to fulfill our destiny, no Jew should be left behind. The Hebrew word for bone, etzem, also means essence. The Jewish people were about to embark on a journey through a desert whose barrenness and perils were a reflection of its spiritual desolation. In order to be able to survive this journey, Moshe ensured that the Jewish people were accompanied by the essence and spirit of Yosef HaTzadik, Yosef the Righteous One, who triumphed against great spiritual challenges. Now, human input in miracles and God's blessings. So Moshe tried to calm the Jews and started to pray to God for deliverance. But God told Moshe there was no need to pray. All that was necessary was that he lift his staff over the sea and it would split, enabling the Jews to pass through it to safety. God told Moshe, "Va'ata hareim es matacha u'natei es yarcha al hayam," and you lift up your staff and stretch out your arm over the sea. The splitting of the Sea of Reeds was a miraculous and supernatural event, yet there had to be a natural action to ignite the miracle. God instructed the people to journey forward and Moshe to lift his staff over the water. God always demands some human act first, and only then does he perform miracles. This is because events that occur without our involvement do not truly affect us. Only when we expend some effort do we truly appreciate God's miracle. The same applies in all areas of life, including making a living. Asking for God's blessings is not sufficient. We must also make some effort that can serve as a conduit for the blessing. Now, splitting of the sea and changing direction. So the sea split and the Jews passed through it to safety. The Egyptians followed them onto the dry seabed, but God made the water return to its natural state, drowning them all. When the waves of the sea threw the dead Egyptians upon the shore, Moshe and Miriam led the Jewish men and women in praising God for rescuing them. After this, the Jews collected the gold, silver, and precious jewels with which the Egyptians had adorned their horses and chariots. There was so much wealth that the next day, the 22nd of Nisan, they were still busy collecting it, so Moshe had to force them to move on. V'yasa Moshe es Israel miyam suf v'yotzu al midbar Shur. And Moshe caused Israel to journey from the sea to the wilderness of Shur. We see Moshe had to forcibly make the Israelites set out from the Sea of Reeds. The Jewish people did not linger out of greed. They were fulfilling God's commandment to empty Egypt of its wealth. The spiritual dimension of this directive was to salvage all the potential sparks of holiness present in this wealth by later using it for a holy purpose in building the Mishkan or tabernacle, for example. From this we learn two lessons. First, once we know what our divine mission in life is, we must be so devoted to it that doing anything else seems unthinkable. On the other hand, as soon as it is clear that it is time to change direction, we must not hesitate. We should apply ourselves to our new mission with the same enthusiasm we gave to our previous one. Second, just as the Jews did not want to leave a single piece of Egyptian wealth unelevated, we should desire to bring every last individual closer to God. Until we receive a clear directive to focus on something else, we must view every individual who is estranged from God as a priceless pearl waiting to be redeemed from Egypt. Now, lessons of the manna. So, led by God's pillar of cloud, the people proceeded on their journey toward Mount Sinai. On the 15th of Iyar, the Jews ran out of matzah. God then began to feed them with manna, a type of bread that miraculously descended from heaven each morning. And God told Moshe, "Behold, I will cause bread to descend for you from the heavens. The people will go out and gather each day's portion on that day, so that I can test them whether they will follow my teaching or not." Even if we believe that everything is in God's hands, we still tend to think that our own efforts also play a role in acquiring our physical sustenance. In contrast, manna was acquired without almost all human effort, and so left no room for such misconceptions. Even so, God did not allow the people to collect more than one day's worth of manna at a time, for whenever the pantry would have been full, so to speak, the people would not have felt entirely dependent upon God, and their emunah, their faith, would not have been tested to the ultimate degree. On the other hand, God did generally require the people to go out and gather the manna, rather than deliver it to their doorsteps. In this way, He prepared them for their eventual entry into the real world. If acquiring the manna had not required any human effort whatsoever, the people would have dismissed it as an isolated miracle irrelevant to real life. But by being required to collect the manna, they learned that human effort and God's blessings work together. The manna taught us that our sustenance always comes from heaven. Even when it appears to be the fruit of our own labor, it is in fact a gift from God. For 40 years, the children of Israel were sustained by bread from heaven, the manna, instilling in them the recognition that sustenance comes entirely from God, that no matter how much one toils to earn his livelihood, he receives no more and no less than what has been allotted him from above. Every Jew's portion is allotted to him or her each year on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. But the greater challenge was to retain this recognition also after entering the land and making the transition to bread from the earth. Even when we are nourished by bread which we earn by the sweat of our brow, we must remember that in truth our sustenance always comes from God, and that we never receive an iota more or less than what is allotted to us from above. Now, the connection between Shabbos and the manna. So the manna did not descend on the Sabbath. Instead, a double portion descended on Friday. This was the only exception to God's directive not to save manna from one day for the next, but it also served as a great test of their emunah. On Friday, Moshe told the people, "Shabboson, Shabbos Kodesh, Lashem Machar." Tomorrow will be a day of rest, a holy Sabbath unto God. This is the first explicit mention in the Torah of the obligation to observe the Sabbath. It is appropriate that the Sabbath is introduced in connection with the Manna, for the Sabbath and the Manna share a common purpose, to underscore our complete dependency upon God as the true source of all sustenance. Belief that human effort is the sole determining factor for success makes it hard to justify giving up a full day's income. On the face of it, it might seem that ceasing work 1 day a week would lessen one's income, but the Jew knows that his earthly labor is only the channel through which God chooses to supply him what is essentially bread from heaven, and that the best and most efficient conduit is one that conforms to the will of him who supplies sustenance to all his creatures. Thus, refraining from work on the Sabbath is a clear affirmation of our faith that sustenance lies in God's hands, and that our work is no more than a vessel through which God's blessings can flow. Now, lessons from Amalek. At the next stop, there was no water to drink, but instead of trusting that God would provide for them, the people complained. God had Moshe strike a rock with his staff, and this rock miraculously gave forth enough water for all the people's needs. This well accompanied the Jews throughout their trek through the desert. The Jews were then attacked by the nation of Amalek. The physical attack of the nation of Amalek was the outer manifestation of the spiritual attack of the people's inner Amalek, their doubt regarding God's providence, care, and involvement in their lives. Hayesh Hashem bekirbenu im ayin, says the Pasuk, because they tested God, saying, is God among us or not? V'yavo Amalek v'yalachem im Israel b'Refidim. Then came Amalek and waged war with Israel in Refidim. After all they had seen God do on their behalf, the 10 plagues brought upon Egypt to free them, the splitting of the sea, the bread from heaven, the manna that descended each morning to nourish them, how could the people of Israel possibly question, is God amongst us or not? But such is the nature of doubt. There is doubt that is based on a rational query. There is doubt that rises from the doubter's subjective motives and desires, but then there is doubt pure and simple, doubt that neutralizes the most compelling evidence and the most inspiring experience with nothing more than a cynical shrug. Amalek is the essence of doubt, of irrational challenge to truth. Thus, the Hebrew word Amalek has a numerical value of 240, the same as the word safek, doubt. Because the people of Israel had succumbed to the Amalek within their own souls, they became vulnerable to attack by Amalek the nation. This inner Amalek continues to plague us today, attempting to sow doubt and cool our religious fervor. It acknowledges that God exists, but tries to convince us that God is too great to care about the details of our Jewish observance. Doubt leads to doubt, and eventually our inner Amalek convinces us that God is not involved in human life altogether. That, in turn, causes us to abandon our search for godliness and spirituality, Rahman al-Islam. Thus, just as the exodus from Egypt reoccurs in every generation and every day, so does the war with Amalek. Every day we must silence the voice of doubt that seeks to halt our spiritual progress. Once we successfully leave our inner Egypt and overcome our inner Amalek, we are ready to receive the Torah anew and enter our own promised land. Successfully implementing this process of spiritual growth on an individual basis will hasten its collective fulfillment, bringing the world to its messianic redemption. May it be very soon in our days, Be'ezrat Hashem, God willing. Now, finally, Tu B'Shvat, the new year for trees, which is today. What is Tu B'Shvat all about? Trees are often a metaphor for humans. During war, one may lay siege to a town, but one may not cut down the fruit trees. The verse reads, when you lay siege to a city for many days to capture it by making war against it, you shall not destroy its trees, wielding an axe against them, for you shall eat of it but not cut it down, for man is a tree of the field. Tu B'Shvat is a time for Jews to focus on the tree, the tree of Torah and the tree of our own spiritual growth and our potential for growth. And it also urges us to see ourselves as the guardians of the world for the sake of future generations. That's the end of Parshas Beshalach, and God willing we'll be with you again next week for Parshas Yisro. Until then, have a great week. Shalom.